The best of money matters. The big story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin, Jeong. Following a deadly attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir on April 22nd, India launched what it called retaliatory strikes on Pakistan-held parts of the territory. New Delhi has accused Islamabad of sheltering a militant group that allegedly carried out the attack. After 4 days of intense fighting, a ceasefire deal was reached on May 10th. But how long will it last as tensions between the two nuclear-armed neighbours continue to simmer? Will the Indian-Pakistan truce hold? Well, joining us today to share more is Dr. Sinderpal Singh, who is a senior fellow and assistant director of the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University. Hi, Dr. Singh. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Singh, what was your initial reaction to the ceasefire deal? Why did both sides accept the ceasefire so promptly?
I guess both sides were worried for different reasons and to different magnitudes about the consequences of the conflict escalating further. So I think both sides were concerned about the costs associated with a further escalation in the conflict between the two countries.
Well, does this signal that neither side wanted a full-blown war?
Yes, I don't think either side was interested in a full-blown war. If you use earlier crisis between India and Pakistan as a benchmark, you probably find that India is probably more worried about escalation than Pakistan. But having said that, both sides obviously did not want to have a full-blown war.
Right.
Both sides knew the dangers of a full-blown war. So that's why no one mentioned the word having a war. So I think that's why also the reason why you asked, the lack of interest in trying to, label this as a full-scale war.
Right. But how close were we, prior to the deal to seeing a full-blown conflict happening? Is this crisis much worse than we've seen in the past?
I think most analysts will agree that since both countries acquired nuclear weapons in 1998, this is probably the worst conflict we've seen between them in terms of the scope, in terms of the weapons used, in terms of the damage inflicted. So since 1998, when these two countries acquired nuclear weapons, yes, this has been the worst conflict.
Well, why do both countries avoid officially declaring war despite engaging in sustained military operations? Dr. Singh, is there any strategic benefit from this sort of ambiguity?
Yes, there is. Both countries have nuclear weapons. So if you look at it from the Indian perspective, India wanted to represent this as a strike with limited aims, right, across a very specific area with specific targets. So India had no strategic benefit from trying to label this as a full-blown war. The ambiguity I wouldn't use the term ambiguity, I would say it's very clear that they said that their aims were limited, the target was limited, and that was India's response to what India deemed was a Pakistan-backed or Pakistan-supported terrorist attack in Kashmir. So I think what happens after that is Pakistan felt compelled to respond, and then India felt compelled to respond to that response. And that's where we all started getting quite concerned about the spiral of response and counter-response.
Right. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump took to social media on Saturday to announce that India and Pakistan had agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. How significant is the role of international mediation in brokering this deal, especially the U.S., compared to, past interventions?
I think if you ask for the official Indian position, they will reject the word mediation. The Indians have insisted that the conflict between India and Pakistan is a bilateral one that only can be solved bilaterally. Of course, Pakistan has always tried to internationalize not only the Kashmir issue, but the bilateral issues between India and Pakistan. So that's one difference. So in this particular instance, when the first attacks, when the Indian missile attacks happened, what was surprising was that the US response was rather muted, relatively speaking, as compared to earlier encounters in 2016 and 2019. So some of us were a bit surprised that there wasn't a larger response from the US. It seemed to indicate that it doesn't want to get involved. We saw that India had a right to respond, but it said, try not to escalate. So at that point, it was some people are surprised because traditionally US administrations have come in and tried to broker ceasefires or try to de-escalate tension. So even in this case, after a while, we understand that Vice President J.D. Vance played a very important role in trying to relay messages from the two sides, which led to the two sides then finally talking to each other, which then led to an agreement to a ceasefire.
But how credible is the ceasefire agreement announced by Trump, given that, both sides accused each other of violating it within hours?
If you ask me, I think the ceasefire, broadly speaking, is credible. I don't think we are going to see a return to the kind of attacks, the scale of attacks we saw over the 3 or 4 days of the conflict. Ceasefire violations between India and Pakistan are actually quite common because the firing that occurs, especially across the line of control in Kashmir, is quite common. I understand that since the reported violations, today and yesterday, actually, I think there have been no serious violations or even, in fact, no violations of the ceasefire. So I expect the ceasefire to hold. It's in both countries' interest not to escalate this further. Both countries will try to come out of this showing that they won on some level because you've got a domestic constituency that both countries have to, pander to some extent. So both will come out and say, the ceasefire was beneficial to us, we've achieved such and such objectives, but the ceasefire will hold.
Well, Dr. Singh, let's take it back a bit and explore the root cause of the April conflict and also the decades-old issue of territorial claims and ethnic religious tensions here. I mean, what triggered the most recent escalation between India and Pakistan, making it spiral so quickly?
I think that attack on civilians, Indian and some foreign tourists in Kashmir, was seen as an incident which the Indian government could not just ignore. We've seen this before in 2016 where the Indian paramilitary forces were attacked. 2019 there was an attack again, but this time it was on civilians. And this level of attack on Indian civilians, as far as the Indian government is concerned, it couldn't look away. It had to do something about it, right? So there's a part dependency here. In 2016 and 2019, the Indian government blamed these terrorist attacks to Pakistan and said that Pakistan will suffer the consequences. India strike back, so it did again. So I think that's the immediate root cause of this particular incident. But of course, the issue of the Indian-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, that has yet to be resolved. As far as the Indian state is concerned, the issue is resolved to some extent. Of course, they still claim the part that is administered by Pakistan, but I think more or less the Indian state thinks that what was the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir has now become an integral part of India. Recently, they did a constitutional change. We removed the special status, Article 370 of the state of Jammu and Kashmir to integrate it more deeply into the Indian state. So as far as India is concerned, of course, the official position is it still claims parts as administered by Pakistan, but in practical terms is ready to move on, use that line as an international border and move on. I think for Pakistan it's a very different proposition because for Pakistan, Kashmir is an existential issue. It's about the identity of what Pakistan is. So Kashmir speaks to that central Pakistani identity. So for Pakistan, Kashmir is not an issue that you can put on the back burner. It's not an issue you can keep delaying. Right. So that is where I think there are two positions. There's a huge mismatch.
Well, Dr. Singh, what is the impact of nationalist and religious ideologies on the, perpetuation of hostility between India and Pakistan then?
For Pakistan, since the 1970s and 80s, increasingly it's accepted by most analysts that the Pakistani state and the Pakistani military after that, which was largely a very secular institution, increasingly has become Islamicized, instantly more religious, and that has an impact in how Pakistan represents itself and how groups within Pakistan see the Kashmir conflict represented as a clash between religious identities, Pakistan being Muslim on one side and India being, in their opinion, being Hindu on the other side. Of course, since the BJP has come to power as well, there has been a sharpening of rhetoric around religious identity as well. And so you then have in India, of course, never at the scale of what has happened in Pakistan since the late 70s and 80s, but in India, there's a sharpening divide, sharpening rhetoric about this is a nationalist project, protecting Kashmir, pushing back against terrorists. And unfortunately, some groups have represented this within India as well as a religious clash between two countries based on two different religions. So I think that has made things worse. That has pushed political leaders to take certain actions which sometimes may be, not optimal in terms of national strategy or defense or military strategy. So I think that's also made things a bit harder to settle.
Well, Dr. Singh, in a little over 25 years, both countries have possessed nuclear weapons. India and Pakistan each have about 170 nuclear weapons. What are the nuclear arsenals of India and Pakistan like?
So firstly, I don't know how much information there is on the type of the two nations' nuclear weapons. I am not a big expert on nuclear weapons, but what we know is that the Indian program came much later. The India has said that its nuclear program was to deal with the insecurity that India feels from a nuclear China, right? So it's a professed public statement, while the Pakistan case for nuclear weapons is that it means to make sure that India doesn't make the Pakistan state disappear. Right? Undo partition. So very strange kind of, triangle where Indian concerns lie with China in terms of having a nuclear guarantee, while the Pakistan nuclear arsenal is to guarantee against what India can do to it. So there's a bit of asymmetry there.
Well, given that both countries are nuclear armed, then how real is the risk of escalation into a nuclear exchange?
In my opinion, it's not very high. I don't think the chances of it spiraling into the nuclear domain is high. You must understand that one of Pakistan's strategy has always been to try to, ratchet up escalation and then quickly try to play the boogeyman of the nuclear weapons, so other countries will come in, mediate, try to broker a deal. So, but the problem is, I think for even at that level, I don't think anyone who's serious enough takes the Pakistani claim seriously that they will use nuclear weapons at such a low threshold. Because the threshold, even during this exchange, the threshold wasn't very high. There was no danger that, India was going to take over the whole of Pakistan and rule it, right? I mean, the threshold was way, way lower. But even then, Pakistan sort of hinted that if nuclear weapons. But I don't think any serious analyst believes that it was going to, spiral into that domain.
Well, in another development here, Dr. Singh, India suspended a key river water sharing treaty, the Indus Waters Treaty, despite the countries reaching a ceasefire agreement on May 10th after days of deadly fighting. How serious is the water issue in this conflict, and could it trigger future confrontations?
Yes, I think the official position is that they have suspended, so they're not, then pull out of the treaty. To be fair, in the last decade or so, there have been quite a range of problems trying to implement the treaty, and India has had quite a bit of complaints about the treaty being outdated, because don't forget, this treaty was signed in 1950. So India has been pushing back against some provisions. There have been some other issues. Now the Indians have said they're going to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty. The Pakistani response has been that this is seen as an act of war. So that seems to signal that it's quite a serious issue. But if you look at what's been going on, I think the key problem will happen in the drier months in Pakistan, supposedly when water shortages are felt. And this water is largely used for irrigation and agriculture, right? So I think that will be the issue. But some people also say at this point in time, it's not clear whether India has the capacity to store all that water that it may want not to share with Pakistan. Right? So there are some technical details I'm not very sure about, but there is a sense that at this point in time, storing all that water and denying Pakistan the water, India at this time doesn't have that capacity. But is it going to build that capacity in the next 10, 15 years? And then how will Pakistan respond? Would they see it as an act of war, as they claim officially, and what will they do?
Okay. Just to wrap up here, Dr. Singh, let's go back to the ceasefire deal that we touched on earlier in our conversation. I mean, given the pattern of previous ceasefires, what is the possibility that this agreement will lead to lasting peace? And will this just be another temporary pause?
I don't think even the most optimistic observer of India-Pakistan relations will offer any promise of lasting peace between India and Pakistan. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the best case scenario is longer pauses between heightened conflict, right? So for India, as it navigates the world, it doesn't want to be equated with Pakistan, because in terms of its economy, in terms of its defense forces, in terms of influence in the world, it feels that he has far outstripped Pakistan. So it's playing a different game. It's got China, friends to the US. So for it, the idea is to minimize or lengthen the pause between heightened conflict with Pakistan. So if you look at that, so 2019 was the last, the Balakot attacks, and then In fact, in 2022, they agreed to a ceasefire along the LOC. So, and there have been elections in Kashmir as well recently, So, to some extent, there has been a pause of at least about, one could say, maybe 5 years or so. So the idea for India would be to lengthen this pause. So I think something will happen again down the line. What will happen, how India will respond, that we'll see depending on the circumstances. But there's not going to be lasting peace. I think there's a major structural problem in the relationship that cannot be resolved.
Okay. Then what would it, realistically take for India and Pakistan to reach a durable peace? And is that feasible given the current political climate in both countries?
I think from what we know, what is available, the closest India and Pakistan came to resolving, a key part of their rivalry and find some amount or some road pathway to durable peace was when General Musharraf and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh were in power in both countries respectively. Mm-hmm. But then, Musharraf, his domestic position was a bit shaky and things didn't happen. I think at this point it's probably the hardest time because if you look in Pakistan, the army's position is relatively speaking, not the strongest because its position vis-a-vis Imran Khan, who's in jail, the army is under pressure. So, and also for the BJP government, as I said, it's got other things. It sees foreign policy as Pakistan not being part of its major foreign policy priority at all. The priorities lies elsewhere. Trying to work out a deal with China, trying to work out the tariffs with Trump, trying to do look east policy towards Southeast Asia, look west towards the Middle East. There is not much bandwidth to go and find a deal with Pakistan. And so I think at this point in time, the conditions in both countries do not, I think, give us much promise that any kind of even a durable pause will happen because every time the Pakistani military is under pressure, we tend to see something happen vis-a-vis India because that helps the Pakistan military in terms of domestic legitimacy as well within Pakistan. So I guess at this point, it will be difficult to see what will come out. I guess one of the lessons that the Indian state wanted to communicate to Pakistan was that if we think that you are involved in a terrorist attack, our attacks will no longer just be token attacks. We will impose cost on you. Right. Attack air bases, maybe attack places of economic interest, your stock exchange. So we will try to impose costs on you. We want deterrence, but whether the deterrence will happen, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, finally, Dr. Singh, before we let you go here, what else will you be looking out for in this front in the coming days or weeks ahead?
I think the one thing for me that will be of interest is how this will affect, firstly, Pakistan internally, because on some level, the army manages to spin this, Pakistan army spins this as a win, it stood up to India, and it showed India that, it won't be hit without response, then it might help show up legitimacy domestically. In terms of bilateral relations, I don't see anything really happening. There might be some agreement, some discussion on the Indus Waters Treaty. But again, the positions are so fixed between the two of them. I find it hard to see how they will find any space to come, try to come somewhere halfway. So I'm not very optimistic about anything major happening. I think now the talks are about, just making sure that the hostilities don't go back into that level which they were before the ceasefire was agreed.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for your time and your insights today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Dr. Sinderpal Singh, who is the Senior Fellow and Assistant Director of the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.